Good. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
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 Great. Again, I'm excited to talk tonight about Trumpeter Swans, as well as the really exciting restoration and reintroduction work that's been happening throughout Montana and throughout the Rocky Mountains. But before I start, I need to give you a disclosure and recognize my good friend and longtime mentor, Bill Long, who is pictured here. Bill Long, since the late 80s, has been running the Wyoming Wetland Society. And in 1994, the Wyoming Wetland Society started a captive rearing program to raise and release trumpeter swans back to help try and bolster local populations. And so I've worked very closely with Bill here on this presentation. He shared a number of his slides and photographs. He's been a great friend, continues to be a great friend and mentor. And so I certainly want to acknowledge him here. And with that, tonight I'm going to cover sort of three broad topics: basically ecology and life history of trumpeter swans, some of the restoration efforts, and then some new and continuing research looking at trumpeter swan movements using GPS collars. There will be three broad themes woven throughout tonight's talk. And that is first, that it's not so much about swans, it's about wetlands. Swans represent a unique wetland habitat, namely emergent wetlands, that some of our rare and uncommon waterfowl and shorebirds depend upon. So it's about wetlands. Second, it's also the role of private landowners and landowner stewardship plays in conserving wildlife habitat as well as wetlands throughout the West. And really, private landowners are critical partners, both in terms of some of the critical habitat they provide for wildlife, for example, wintering, bottomland winter range, as well as for trumpeter swans. And the third is that this story is also about community and partnership. There have been tremendous collaborative efforts involving numerous people, organizations, and communities that have rallied around trumpeter swans, wetlands, and their preservation. And so with that, for me, the story began about 25 years ago when Bill Long gave me my first opportunity in wildlife and hired me as a summer technician to help with the Wyoming Wetland Society's captive rearing program. And so I spent my early 20s running around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, monitoring wild swan productivity and helping rear swans, cygnets, and release birds throughout the Pinedale area. And so that's where I got my start, both in wildlife. That's where I started my relationship with Bill. And today I moved back to the west, to the Flathead Valley about 5 years ago, and have the opportunity now to work as a volunteer, helping out with releases, some collaring. And so my point here is the trumpeter swan recovery is an amazing story. If anything, I am but a small footnote. And that the true heroes of this story are the folks that have dedicated their wildlife careers. Folks Dale Becker, Tribal Wildlife Program Coordinator for the Natural Resource Department of the Confederate Salish and Kootenai Tribes, John Jarvis, who runs the Montana Waterfowl Foundation, as well as numerous others that have collaborated over the last 2 decades. And basically every trumpeter swan you see in the valley breeding is a direct descendant of Dale and John's and others' successful restoration efforts over the last 2 decades. So my takeaway point here is, don't conflate my role as a storyteller with the Herculean effort of local heroes like Dale Becker and John Jarvis and many other individuals, organizations, and communities that have done the hard work of recovering these birds. So with that, I want to jump very quickly into sort of Swan 101. So the trumpeter swan, Cygnus buccinator, is North America's largest waterfowl species. They have a wingspan up to 8 feet. And when I started giving these talks about 25 years ago, I said, that's rivals Michael Jordan's wingspan. And I guess now I should say LeBron James, but they're a tremendously big bird. They can weigh up to 30 pounds. And so this is not some, spring turkey flying from tree to tree. This is a large bird with a large wingspan that is capable of flying hundreds of miles. So kudos to them, I guess. Males are called cobs, and they're generally a little bigger than the pens or the females. And in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, they're listed as species of concern. We have two native swans in the area, the trumpeter and the tundra. The trumpeter is a larger one and is distinguished by its straight black bill, its less distinctive eyes, and a pink mouth line compared to the tundra, which is really just passing in migration and has a concave bill, prominent eyes due to those yellow lower patches. Swans, as I mentioned, are associated with unique wetland habitats and live in sort of pristine, shallow wetlands. They forage on aquatic plants and insects, and actually insects, even small fish, make up about 10% of their diet. Thanks to their long neck, they can forage up to 3 feet underwater. And you often see other waterfowl species foraging sympatrically with them, taking advantage of some of the morsels that they miss as they stir up the sediment and dig for tubers and aquatic vegetation. These are long-lived birds. Life expectancy is about 25 years. And with any long-lived species, adult mortality is very significant in terms of population growth and sustainability. So they're long-lived birds. Adults will mate for life, although they will break those pair bonds if they have successive years of nest failure. So they do mate for life, but it's also predicated on success. Adults reach sexual maturity around age 3 or 4, and breeding and egg laying occurs anywhere from April to early June. A typical clutch is between 4 to 6 eggs, and it really depends, though, on body condition, especially of the females coming out of winter. So this is key, and winter habitat quality is one of the concerns that has led to low productivity in recent years in parts of their U.S. range. During the egg laying period, the female will lay an egg just about every other day, and she won't start to incubate the eggs until the clutch is complete. And so as such, she'll incubate for about 33 days, and then the eggs will hatch what they call sort of synchronously. And so the swans will, or the cygnets will emerge from their eggs within 24 to 48 hours, and she will brood them in the nest again for about 1 to 2 days, and then they'll leave, although they'll often come back within the first week to 10 days and brood within the nest itself. Let's see, less than a year old, we call those small birds swimming next to the adults cygnets. They're gray at birth, and they'll molt feathers in the first year, after the first year, and turn white. It takes them about 120 days to gain flight.
Okay.
Here again are a couple pictures of cygnets at different ages. In the top left screen, you have 3 cygnets that are about a week to 10 days old. And at the bottom right, looks to be a pair of cygnets that are about 100 days old. They look like their flight feathers haven't quite fully developed. A little bit about their life history and distribution. Trumpeter swans were once considered abundant and widespread across North America, but their populations declined greatly during the period of European settlement due to overharvest for both the fur trade and for subsistence hunting. And so by about 1932, well, I should say, I think the last swans were documented in the Flathead Valley in 1886. And by 1933, it was believed that there were fewer than 70 swans that remained in the U.S. And these were non-migratory resident birds that were residing within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, where they were protected by their isolation, and due to geothermal activity, where they had open water year-round, they didn't have to migrate. And so it was that isolation and those geothermal features that really kept them from, protected them. At the same time, there was also about 70 birds, migratory birds from Canada at the same time. So less than 200 birds by the 1930s. Since then, those swan populations have recovered due to protection from hunting, habitat preservation, and restoration programs. And today, there are over 60,000 swans in the continental U.S., and they're divided into 3 management populations. There's the Pacific Coast population, the Rocky Mountain population, and the interior population, as illustrated here in this map. For the rest of the talk, I will focus on the Rocky Mountain population, which today has grown to over 12,000 adult birds. And the Rocky Mountain population now consists really of two segments. There's a migratory segment that nests in Canada and then migrates south during the winter to, and winters basically around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And that accounts for over 94% of the Rocky Mountain population. And so the US population, which is largely sedentary, has not seen the same recovery as the Canadian migrants. And today there are about 700 of those birds. I'll talk a little bit now about the US distribution of that population. So whereas our migrants, the migratory flocks from Canada would winter in the US, basically,
Franz?
Yes.
Can you hold on one second?
Yeah.
I think somebody is not muted. We're getting a lot of feedback. Pat, it might be you. Can everybody just check to make sure that they are muted? Thanks. Sorry, Franz, go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was talking a little bit about the U.S. distribution and why the U.S. section of the Rocky Mountain trumpeter population has not seen the same recovery of the Canadian migrants. And that is in part because, because of their sedentary nature. We have the Canadian migrants come down, they winter basically on the breeding grounds of our U.S. population. And then as spring comes, right around now, February, March, they start to migrate north and they actually encounter warmer conditions on the Canadian breeding grounds, maybe 3 weeks ahead of where we are right now. And in turn, our residents are really they've thrown a winter party and the cupboards are a little more bare. So they're sedentary and their wintering grounds are also their breeding grounds, since they don't have the body condition they need necessarily to produce the numbers that they are in Canada. So today, again, our U.S. Rocky Mountain population is only about 6% of the total. And as of 2018, there are about 260 birds in the Flathead, compared with 252 in Wyoming, 200 in Idaho, and 300 in the rest of Montana. So again, we'll get back to the contribution of restoration efforts, but the Flathead restoration flux makes up a large proportion of our today's Rocky Mountain population. And still today, they remain small, isolated, and largely non-migratory. To give you an example, in Yellowstone National Park, which had a high of, I think, 69 birds in 1961, it was down to just 10 birds in 2007. So because of the stagnant population within the U.S., the Wyoming Wetland Society back in around 1994 started to get involved with captive rearing of trumpeter swans. And now the Wyoming Wetland Society's mission is to protect and enhance wetlands and the associated flora and fauna for future generations. So again, it's about wetlands, but they got involved with swans in part as their function as an umbrella species, but also what they started doing is to raise swans in the Jackson Hole area, and then they would release them down in Pinedale on the Green River, where you didn't have those geothermal features that would keep the water open through the winter. So these birds were actually forced to start migrating. And what they found is they would migrate down the Green, submaking it as far as Salt Lake City, and then return. They even had one of the birds go up north and nest in the Blackwater, Clearwater drainage, and actually was the impetus for the start of a restoration program up there. So the Wyoming Wetland Society has a breeding flock of about 9 to 10 mated pairs. They raise the cygnets in captivity for about 100 plus days and then release them after doing disease testing. And they release them into different sites to try and bolster local populations and increase genetic diversity. This slide here illustrates some of the many drainages they've worked in, starting in Pinedale, Wyoming, and then up into the Madison Valley, Blackfoot, Flathead, Driggs, Idaho, and now working in Yellowstone National Park as well. There are basically two approaches for releasing captive bird swans into the wild. The first is taking pre-fledged cygnets. So these are cygnets around 110 days and releasing them as a group on a small wetland. What they found is these birds will, as the wetland freezes, migrate on their own and then return to the area in the following year. If there are other swans that are molting on that area, they often group up and migrate with them. Survival in return is good. There's a lot of area fidelity, but not necessarily fidelity to the exact wetland where they were released. Another technique they use is grafting very young, 16-hour-old cygnets to an active nest. And this is done in situations where they're trying to bolster diversity, or perhaps they have a nesting pair that's failing habitually, whether they're having trouble incubating with clutch to completion, or other reasons. But what they do there is they'll go in after she starts incubating her eggs, pull those eggs and leave fiberglass fake eggs to kind of keep her on the nest, and she'll continue to incubate those fake eggs. They'll take the real eggs back, incubate them to hatch, and then bring them back within hours of hatching. And what they'll do is they'll then pull the fake eggs, leave the babies in the nest, and the cob of the pen will actually adopt those birds. So that's worked very well, and with their efforts there, they've actually seen survival exceeding 80% of those cygnets to fledge in return. So that's another technique that they've used. Here's a quick table that sort of outlines some of the Wyoming Wetland Society's work since 1994, starting again in the Green River. Between the years of 1994 to year 2000, they released over 200 birds, and today they have 15 to 25 nesting pairs in that area. The CSKT and the Flathead, again, the last 20 years, releasing over 250 birds, and this has been tremendously successful. I think, CSKT, along with the Montana Waterfowl Foundation, have released with the Wyoming Wetland Society over 250 birds, and resulted over 150 successful nest attempts, and fledged over 400 cygnets. And I think annually now they're pumping out upwards of 60 plus fledgling a year. And again, nesting was primarily on the Flathead Indian Reservation, but now as the population has grown, it's expanded, and they're seeing nesting north up into Eureka, out to Marion and Lost Trail, and even there's pairs in Glacier National Park. I think 2 years ago I saw some on Kootenai Lake. So they're expanding, and they even think they're up in Canada as well. So that's been tremendously successful. On the Blackfoot, again, starting in 2002, releasing upwards of 200 plus birds, and they're now seeing between 8 to 10 nesting pairs. In the Yellowstone, they started in 2012, 40 birds released to date, and again, 5 to 7 territorial pairs. They haven't yet seen production from these released birds, but again, they're anticipating that any year. Wind River is a program that's just starting, as well as Driggs, Idaho. So again, you start to add these numbers up and look at the numbers. It's a significant portion of the Rocky Mountain, U.S. Rocky Mountain population of birds. Where they're going next, and this is something I got involved in last summer, is a project they're calling Connecting the Dots. And this is basically using GPS collars to help identify wintering areas, document if Trumpeter Swans have successfully expanded their winter range, identifying migratory routes, and I think most important is to identify and prioritize new areas and projects for swan release with the potential to connect and expand the breeding range. Again, it's this idea that the U.S. population is still fairly small, isolated, fragmented populations, and the next phase for recovery is really trying to connect these populations. And so these GPS collars are going to be very helpful in that. Again, they're GPS collars. They're actually through connectivity is through cell towers. They weigh about 60 grams. In the last 2 years, they've put out about 15. So there's 15 online right now, with 15 more planned for this coming year. This map here kind of shows you the current distribution of where our birds are as of this morning. So all the way down south of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, you could see our bird up here that's actually on Church Slough this morning. So how do you capture these things? Big birds, what we do is you wait for them to molt. And so when their wings molt, they're not able to fly. And last year I got in touch with Dave because I was looking for locations of pairs and trying to ascertain where we might have some molting birds that we could have put a collar on. And so some of the distinctive features of a bird that's molting is if you look at their wings, they have a humpback, and that's because they've lost their flight feathers. And the other aspect is their tails look very long. And so the bird on the left is one that is in wing molt, whereas the one on the right is not. And when they can't fly, they can't swim away either. And so with a kayak, you can paddle up and pretty much grab them. If you have two kayaks, it actually goes very quickly. You can corral them, and it's a much shorter chase. And once you pick them up, swans are, can be aggressive if they're defending their nest. But once you get a hold of them, they play dead. I mean, that's their strategy, and they'll wait to see if you kind of loosen your grip, and then they'll try and explode. But once you have them, they will pretty much kind of lie pretty flaccid. You see pictures, I think, of releases where the birds have their necks just draped around the person holding them. And so, anyways, that's how you capture a bird. It can take as little as 5 minutes. And I want to share quickly with you some of the information we've been getting over the last 2 years. So these are 2 slides of winter movements of some flathead area swans. And the thing to think about winter migration, it's really driven by ice and the availability of open water. And so birds that have been captured on the Flathead Indian Reservation winter largely along the lower Flathead, both on Lower Flathead Lake, but also along the Lower Flathead River between Nixon and the Clark Fork confluence. These are 2 slides of a yearling bird that we banded off of Farm to Market Road in Whitefish this past July. And so on the left, you can see the bird's movement since July, and it's had a home range of about 50 kilometers north to south and maybe 20 kilometers east to west, ranging from Duck Lake north of Only down to Flathead Lake. And during the coldest parts of the month, in the polar vortex we had last month, it was focused around Church and Egan sloughs. And that one line you see dropping out of your screen during the height of the cold, when I was out ice skating on black ice on Summers Bay, this bird was out in the middle of Flathead Lake, just waiting for things to thaw. Here are 2 different birds that have been collared up in the Blackfoot drainage. And you have one swan that's migrated south, a female. This is the red number 10, who migrated south of Ovando via Twin Bridges and Sheridan and Whitehall. The other bird on the right is a male that's 6 years old, so it's been doing this migration for at least 5 years, basically wintering along the Henry's Fork and Island Park area in Idaho, and doing a 200-mile migration via the Madison Valley through Willow Creek Reservoir near Harrison, Montana, and then on to Norris and Ennis. So one of the nice things about these collars is you can program them. So during regular times of year, they're taking a reading every twice a day, but during migration, you can really up it. So you're getting readouts every half hour or less. So that's some of the stuff we're learning with the collars, but I guess the other thing though is there's really some work for our citizen scientists, and bird sighting, or swan sightings, especially of banded individuals, which you can read the bands reporting both the alphanumeric code as well as the color is incredibly important, especially moving forward as funding for some of the annual surveys that they're doing is declining. So, we have these collars out, but really probably can help a ton simply by reporting collars on eBird. Cornell filters that information and gets it back to folks managing swans. So we all have a role and can provide a lot of information simply by reading bands. And so on the right, you can see the neck bands are pretty easy. The ones in the anklets, you kind of got to wait for the opportune time. So what does the future hold? I think the future for trumpeter swans is very bright, and there's a lot to be optimistic about. Restoration work continues, which is a good thing, but there are also some ongoing threats, including lead ingestion, power line strikes. A lot of adults, or a number, have hit power lines, and power companies have been very good about helping reduce that. Poaching is also an issue. I think last year, you probably heard, we lost a pair up at Meadow Lake, north of Only as well. And these losses have disproportionate impacts on small populations. So it's hard to see that as well. Some of the other challenges facing trumpeters is the restricted breeding distribution, as well as declines in nesting habitat quality due to both recreational disturbance, as well as issues with water supply problems. The other challenge for these birds is a substantial portion of the U.S. Rocky Mountain population is closely linked to impounded and or managed wetlands on national refuges. So again, we have small fragmented populations and some that are concentrated in just a few areas. However, as I think about swans in the last 25 years and the restoration efforts, I also think forward to the next 25 years. And although restoration efforts and reintroduction efforts are going to continue, I think the story over the next 25 years will have a new character, and that's going to be beavers and the role that they're going to have transforming the Montana landscape. So I think there's a lot of excitement right now. There's some concern about what beavers can do for wildlife and wetlands. And I think beaver and their reoccupation of their former historic drainages is going to lead to some of that expansion of nesting ranges within the U.S. as well as some of that connection. So with that, I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank Bill Long and also the numerous individuals and organizations who have contributed to Trumpeter Swan recovery. And with that, if we have time, I'd love to take some questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
Franz, this is Dan Casey. I have a question. I know that here in the Flathead, if trumpeter swans can outcompete geese in a few places, everyone will be very happy. But are there concerns about them when they start nesting in a wetland, excluding breeding habitat for other species as far as their territoriality? Has that come up?
Not that I'm aware of. You probably, I often have people compare or contrast, trumpeters to mute swans and some of the impacts that mute swans have in excluding other waterfowl. I'm not aware. Maybe, Dan, have you heard of issues with trumpeters starting to exclude other, I assume, less common species?
No, I mean, I actually haven't. I just was curious, if you'd heard any of that. I'm on the board of the Trumpeter Swan Society now, which has been exciting and still learning some things. So no, I haven't heard of that, but I just was wondering if people expressed a concern, if there was any, if that was a real thing or not.
I haven't heard, and again, I know it's preferable to mutes. I know the Wyoming Wetland Society has actually worked with landowners in the past that have had, kind of large estates, and say, well, maybe we can swap out and actually, use those wetlands as part of their captive flock. So,
like I say, if there's one less Canada goose pair per wetland, that's okay by me. I misspoke earlier today. I had 128 trumpeter swans at Church Slough, but still really good numbers. I think it's the highest number that has been reported in eBird in the county. So
wow.
Good place to see them right now, folks.
Yeah.
And a sign maybe migration started.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to ask about the best place to see them now.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah, so yeah, Church Slough, the North Shore, WMA, at some point, I'm hearing lots of reports of a fair number of geese out there. We tend to get swans there as well. I don't know if anyone's used the new bird viewing area there. I'd be curious to hear reports on whether that's, a good location if people are actually, able to get birds from that location.
In recent weeks, that hosted thousands of mallards and geese and a gyrfalcon actually, but unless it gets really wet, in the next few weeks, probably won't get a lot of swans. But the North Shore right now does have both species of swans on it, small numbers, but both species are present right here in Summers.
Thank you.
I've seen some swans up at Creston, on the stream going through Creston. Another comment I had, last spring, we had 7 trumpeters land on our marsh. And I think it probably is the absolute smallest body of water they could probably take off from. Because I was just looking at those birds and said, they're not gonna make it when they were trying to fly off, but they did. I was thinking about the time, my first summer at Delta Waterfowl Research Station, they had a captive pair of trumpeter swans nesting there. And I think in those days, that was one of the few pairs that existed. So we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, it is remarkable to see both the recovery of the Canadian population, but also the expansion of the U.S. one. And for worse, we haven't been as successful as we have been with Canada geese.
Yeah.
Hey, Franz, one of the, when you had mentioned that you can put the banding codes in eBird, is that done on, is it done in the app at all, or is it all done afterwards in the computer?
I'm not sure. I wish I had a good answer for you. I haven't used eBird, but what I understand from Bill is if you enter those there, that's one way. You can also, send them to me and I'll pass them on. Is another option.
I think people typically do it in the comments section under a given species listing.
Okay.
Has anybody checked out Ranchette's area on the lower Flathead lately? Because that's a place where I've seen hundreds of swans, mixed flocks in the past. So this time of the year, I'm gonna head out there on Saturday. So I'll check it out too.
Greg Hohenberger checks it reasonably regularly, and it was hosting thousands of ducks. That whole stretch of river there, Rose Creek and Swim Creek and all, has had a lot of birds, but
yeah,
not sure about swans.
Hey, thanks.
Other questions? Gail was asking if, do we still have wintering tundras on the North Shore? Dan, you know about that?
Well, this is kind of an odd winter in that we had so much ice for that little brief period. I had not been seeing them with regularity. In fact, it was kind of an odd winter. Really, trumpeters have been more expected than tundras the last couple of years, whereas, we used to have about 100 tundras in the winter somewhere along the North Shore. I did not see them this year. So I guess the answer is no. There might have been some at Ducharme. I haven't looked at down at the south end at what eBird reports down there were saying, but yeah, it's been a flip flop. It used to be that we were always excited to find a trumpeter, say, on a Christmas count, and now it's almost the opposite.
Any more questions?
I had one question for your Franz about the different flyways. Is there any understanding from mark recapture studies just how much flux there is laterally between flyways? Like, would any of these populations be supported by immigration from another flyway, or is it all pretty much, you need to do captive rearing or bust at this point?
Yeah, there has not been much lateral movement, and that's, obviously one of the reasons why they're doing this. And also one of the reasons that they are fairly choosy with the genetics they use in the captive flock. So the captive flock is, kind of what they call red rocks genetics. So back when we went to the contraction, there were about, 69 birds in the US, and that migratory component. They were centered around sort of Red Rocks, Lake Montana, and the Yellowstone ecosystem, and they're sort of known as the Red Rocks birds. And all of the, they're very careful to make sure that the genetics they're using are from that sort of founding group. It hasn't been a lot of lateral movement. And I think the interior population is largely made up of reintroductions from birds taken from both the Pacific and Rocky Mountain populations.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Roger, sorry.
Oh, what does like the color on the bands mean?
Some different restoration efforts keep the same bands, but it changes from year to year. So without a cheat sheet, you won't be able to do the crosswalk over. So yeah, it'd be nice if it was all the same. But what happens is, band technology has sort of evolved. I mean, we used to put patagial tags. That bird you saw me holding in the beginning had a green tag on its wing, and yeah, things have changed and colors changed throughout time. So without a cheat sheet, I can't tell you.
Okay, thank you.
So Gail was wondering if there's any plans for releasing any in the Swan Valley.
Not to my knowledge, not yet. I think some of the places they're starting to do is, they're working on the Wind River Reservation area in Orlando, Wyoming. I think they're starting to do some work in the Madison and Paradise Valley, trying to sort of fill in the gaps between, Yellowstone north to the flux and the Flathead and the Blackwater. So, or the Blackfoot, excuse me. So I haven't heard of Swan Valley yet. I would also anticipate that as the birds start to expand, that the Swan Valley would be a natural one for them to head north into.
All right.
I see Gail then said, I was wondering how long. I just say, okay. Long till she gets one.
Maybe we should have a drawing or pick the year you think we're going to get them.
I like it. I like it.
All right. Last chance for questions.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, and that is that next month's talk will be on ravens, wolves, and people by John Marsliff from University of Washington. So that should be a good one.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Franz. That was a great talk. I think everybody enjoyed hearing about one of our local species here.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I'm the storyteller. I'm not the main character, but it is a nice story to hear, and it's been fun to be touched by it.
Good story and well told.
Thanks, Franz.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Franz.
Yep.
I think we'll call it there unless anybody has an important announcement about any other bird conservation related items. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Corey. Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
Gail.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye everyone.